Remind everybody that we need all mobile phones switched off, as they can interfere with the recording system even if they are in silent mode. And can move us to agenda item 4 then, Chairperson's business. In relation to the departmental annual accounts, as we discussed last week, I can remind you that the Department advised that it wouldn't be possible to brief the committee today as scheduled on departmental annual accounts due to a timing issue. The Chairperson and I are due to meet with the relevant officials on Friday afternoon, and an oral briefing will be scheduled in September if necessary. Are members content with that approach?
Thank you. No choice.
Great. Okay. Okay. In relation to summer recess housekeeping, as we move into recess, there are a couple of housekeeping matters that I need to seek your agreement on. The first relates to freedom of information requests. It is suggested that authority is delegated to the Chairperson and myself to submit views on releasing or withholding information on any non-routine, non-contentious FOI requests received during recess. Non-routine contentious FOI requests during recess. The committee would be advised of any such requests and the views expressed by the Chair and the Deputy Chair, and the response issued by the FOI unit at the first meeting following recess. Are members content with this approach?
Agreed.
Okay. Regarding correspondence received during recess, it has been committee practice to keep all correspondence for inclusion in the papers for the first meeting back following recess. In exceptional circumstances, urgent correspondence has been circulated to members by email. Are members content with this approach?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, members, at page 111 in your tabled papers, you will see a request from the Belfast Islamic Centre for an opportunity to brief the committee on issues relating to the Belfast Islamic community. Would members have any comments, or are they content that an informal briefing with representatives of the Belfast Islamic community is arranged early in the next session?
Agreed.
A formal meeting?
The request in the table pack is writing to request a meeting with you and Deputy Chairperson, this is addressed to the Chairperson, and some members of the OFM-DFM committee to brief you on the needs of the Islamic community in Belfast.
Can be informal or formal.
I may open to take a proposal, in terms of, I think the perception of that is an informal briefing, but if members have...
I propose the Chair and the Vice Chair meet, and if any other member wants to go along, that's normal procedure in most committees.
Members content?
Agreed.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. In relation to committee invitations, members, there are no outstanding invitations to note. And then we're on to agenda item 5, draft meeting minutes of the meeting of the 25th of June 2014. There's a copy of the draft minutes of the meeting at page 158 in your pack. Are members content to agree the draft minutes? Okay, thank you. Matters arising at page 165 in your pack is a list of outstanding correspondence. Do members have any comments or content to note? Thank you. Okay, correspondence then at page 168 of your pack is correspondence from the Committee for Enterprise, Trade and Investment in relation to a response it received from the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Investment concerning European liaison officers and how information received by DETI from the Barroso desk officers can best be passed to committees. The response indicates that DETI has been in discussion with the Executive Office in Brussels regarding the development of a web-based portal that could be a central source of EU opportunities and activities of relevance to Northern Ireland stakeholders, including committees. Are members content to note or have any questions in relation to that? Noted. Okay, at page 113 of your table pack is the latest monthly update regarding delivering social change. Are members content to note?
Noted.
Okay. At page 117 of your table pack is the latest investing activity report for the department. Members content to note?
Yeah.
And at page 120 of your table pack is correspondence advising that the annual report and accounts for the Strategic Investment Board have been laid in the business office. Noted? Okay. Page 121 of your table pack is correspondence advising that the annual report of the NI Ombudsman and the Commissioner for Complaints has been laid in the business office. Noted? Okay, that's correspondence then. Agenda item 8 is the Legislative Consent Memorandum Childcare Payments Bill. At the meeting of the 11th of June, the committee considered notification from the Department of its intention to introduce a legislative consent motion to the Assembly with regard to Childcare Payments Bill recently introduced at Westminster. The relevant legislative consent memorandum was laid in the business office on Monday the 23rd of June and subsequently referred to the committee for consideration. There is a copy of the LCM at page 225 in your meeting packs. Under relevant standing orders, the committee normally has 20 working days in which to report to the Assembly before the legislative consent motion is brought to the Assembly. Under these timescales, the committee will be required to agree a report on the LCM at its meeting on the 10th of September. The Childcare Payments Bill will create a new scheme to provide financial support for working families with the cost of childcare, which would be administered by HMRC and financed centrally by the UK Government. Through the new scheme, the Government will provide £2 for every £8 which a person pays for childcare, capped at an annual maximum of £2,000 per child. The current system of employer-supported childcare is proposed to be withdrawn after the new scheme comes into operation, and Clause 67 of the Bill amends Schedule 2 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998 to make the operation of the scheme an accepted matter, as it would be administered by HMRC. Member have any comments at this stage, or happy to proceed?
Yep.
Okay. At last week's meeting, the committee agreed to invite Employers for Childcare to provide a briefing on the relevant proposals in the Childcare Payments Bill, and we will now be briefed by Employers for Childcare, and a copy of their briefing paper can be found at page 208 of your pack. I'm glad to be able to welcome to the committee Mairead McMahon, Director of Charity Services, Rachel Dennison, Research Officer, and Chris Briggs, Family Benefits Officer. You're very welcome indeed, folks. Good to see you. Thank you for being able to attend the committee at such short notice. Realise this is an extremely important issue, and I invite you to make some opening remarks. We are under time constraints today, so I suggest you keep your presentation remarks to about 5 minutes, and then we'll take questions from the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Chairperson and members, for taking the time. We do understand we're under pressure, so we'll try and whisk through this as quickly as possible. As we've already said, I'm Director of Charity Services at Employers for Childcare. My colleague Chris here leads on our Family Benefits Advisory Service, and Rachel leads on our Research and Policy Services. At Employers for Childcare, our mission is to make it easier for parents with dependent children to get into or stay in work. And we're here today to represent those hard-working parents whose interests we believe have not been fully considered in the development of this policy. To be absolutely clear from the outset, we welcome the introduction of the tax-free childcare scheme that supports parents who will be better off using this option to support them with their childcare costs. But we need to be very clear about what the tax-free childcare scheme has to offer. We hear a lot about the potential savings of £2,000 per child per year in the media coverage of this scheme, but what we don't hear is that according to a recent survey, only 20% of parents will actually be eligible for anything close to that amount. We have a number of concerns around the Childcare Payments Bill as currently drafted, which broadly fall under two headings. One relates to the operation of the tax-free childcare scheme, and the second relates to the repeal of employer-supported childcare, which Rachel will explain in a moment. So looking first at the proposed Childcare Payments Bill, we have a number of concerns which we've outlined in detail in the written briefing, and I don't want to go over them all now, but I'm going to pick out a couple of key elements to illustrate the problems we foresee with the scheme in its current shape. The tax-free childcare scheme requires both parents to be in work to be eligible for payments, and provides support only for the amount of childcare required to cover the hours worked by parents. This completely fails to take account of the realities faced by many families in Northern Ireland, particularly those on lower incomes, whose working hours change as they're employed on shift patterns, 0 hours contracts, or agency work. What doesn't change for those families are their childcare costs. So to tie their eligibility for payments to their working hours seems to be illogical and completely unfair. Restricting the scheme to families in which both parents are in work will also have a hugely detrimental impact on households in which one parent becomes unemployed during the 3-month eligibility period, meaning they will no longer be eligible for tax-free childcare and will probably therefore lose their place with the registered childcare provider. They're also unlikely to be entitled to the childcare element of working tax credit to supplement their income in these circumstances. This will have a further knock-on impact on the ability of that parent to get back into work, further disadvantaging that family. Reducing the ages of children for which parents will be eligible for support with childcare costs to just 12 will have a detrimental effect on parents who require the support of breakfast and after-school clubs in order to help them stay in work while their children attend secondary school. And it also undermines OFM-DFM's own Bright Start strategy, which aims to provide places for children up to the age of 14 in those breakfast and after-school clubs. The administrative burden of a scheme which requires parents to prove their eligibility every 3 months will also be considerable and does not appear to have been taken into account in any calculations around the cost of introducing it. This also increases the risk of mistakes being made in such applications, with the threat of massive and simply unaffordable penalties for parents if their mistake is considered to be careless or deliberate by HMRC. The legislation as drafted also enables tax-free childcare account providers who have yet to be identified to charge certain fees in the course of providing accounts, and we're fundamentally opposed to the idea that parents should have to pay to access government support in this way. And we note that the existing childcare voucher scheme model represents a much better way, being funded as it is through the savings made by employers who pay lower national insurance contributions. I'm going to pass over to Rachel, who's going to explain to you about the repeal of employer-supported childcare.
Clauses 62 and 63 of the Childcare Payments Bill will close the childcare voucher scheme to new entries from autumn next year. We're strongly opposed to this measure because not only will it limit choice for parents and the ability for families to avail of whatever type of support is most beneficial to them, we also know that many parents will actually be worse off as a result of this change. We agree that there is need to reform the childcare voucher scheme in its current status, and we would recommend, for example, changes such as increasing the voucher amount or making it available to parents who are self-employed, and also introducing a statutory right to request a childcare voucher scheme in your workplace, such as similar to the right to request flexible working, and these measures would help to increase uptake of the scheme. However, to remove the scheme completely will impact on local parents, many of whom will be financially worse off because they'll be no longer able to save £1,800 a month, which they currently can do through the scheme. Others will be forced to reduce their hours of work because they're spending on childcare, so they can reduce their spending on childcare, and an unknown number will have their capacity to return to work hampered because of the loss of a childcare place if they become unemployed during an eligibility period. We also know there will be an impact on local employers if the childcare voucher scheme is closed. They will not only lose out on national insurance contribution savings, which they currently make, but they'll also lose a critical tool which supports employees with the cost of childcare, and it also encourages parents to return to work after parental leave. To take one quick example of increased financial costs for employers, last year the Northern Ireland Civil Service saved £32,000 by offering the childcare voucher scheme to staff. This is an annual saving of £348,000, and that's just one single employer. We know that around 1,000 local companies are using the scheme, and we are concerned that they will lose out for both businesses and their staff, and they won't understand the increased costs if the childcare voucher scheme closes. Given the massive complexities of tax-free childcare, we are concerned about the potential impact on childcare providers as well, who will face increased administration costs as they must account for each child's care in each individual family separately. And given all of the Executive's efforts to drive economic growth, we are concerned about the impact on the economy, as this measure could reduce the capacity for families to return to work and stay in work. As the current childcare voucher scheme will be grandfathered after the tax-free childcare scheme is introduced, and recipients will be allowed to continue to avail of the support for many years to come, we believe that further consideration should be given to allowing the scheme to remain open for new entrants. We would be better off using vouchers rather than tax-free childcare. If parents are only entitled to claim one form of support, it would seem to us that this option will have limited financial implications, if any, and we believe it should therefore be considered in more detail before any final decisions are made.
So to conclude, whilst we welcome the introduction of tax-free childcare for those parents who will benefit from it, we believe the scheme needs to be amended to reflect the realities facing parents who are seeking to balance their work with their childcare requirements, and we oppose the closure of employer-supported childcare schemes. We believe this is an opportunity for the Northern Ireland Assembly to learn from the mistakes which are about to be made elsewhere and to adapt this approach before extending it here. We're particularly concerned that we haven't had sight of any economic impact assessment of this measure locally, nor any equality impact assessment, which would undoubtedly identify differential impacts across a range of Section 75 groupings. Furthermore, we're concerned at the assumptions made in the draft legislative consent memo that there is no scope to introduce regional variations, which not only undermines the principle of devolution, but also appears to be attempting to limit the powers of the Assembly to deviate without clear justification. Given that no detailed costings have been provided outlining how many families' employers will be better or worse off and to what extent as a result of this legislative change, it is simply not possible to determine whether or not such deviation would be desirable. There are countless examples of ministers in the Northern Ireland Assembly using their powers to adapt and modify Westminster policies to suit Northern Ireland circumstances. And as recently as this week, the Minister for Social Development announced that, unlike his counterparts elsewhere, he would be waiving the introduction of a £20 application charge for child maintenance services. If deviation from the Westminster proposals would incur additional costs for Northern Ireland, we would need to examine these closely and balance them against the £13 million in annual savings that will be lost to parents and employers with the closure of the voucher scheme. The tax-free childcare scheme risks undermining efforts to reduce economic inactivity by reducing support for some parents to secure and sustain employment, and takes no account of the need to encourage people who are not in employment to avail of opportunities for training or education. And most worryingly of all for us, we know that very few families will actually be able to avail of the much heralded savings of £2,000 per year, and many will end up worse off as a result of switching to a superficially attractive scheme which actually delivers lower savings in the long term. Thank you very much for your time. We'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed for your presentations. What level of consultation were organisations in Northern Ireland able to avail of in relation to the proposals?
Locally, we're not clear exactly what consultation was undertaken by OFM DFM. We know, obviously, we responded to the consultation at Westminster whenever it was published, but we kind of envisaged that we would have an opportunity to shape this for Northern Ireland at some point. That's what we're trying to do here today, but we haven't really had much to say other than this.
Okay, and how significant a change do you think this is going to be? Can you give some key core messages in terms of the significance of what's being proposed?
Well, essentially, the legislation will close the childcare voucher scheme to new entrants from autumn 2015. If we look at how many people are currently using that scheme at the moment, it's about 11,000 parents in Northern Ireland. They are saving an average of £220, an average of £1,866 a year. If you look at the average cost of a childcare place in Northern Ireland, it's about £8,200. So on childcare vouchers, they're saving £1,866. The maximum they would save under tax-free childcare is £1,640. That's £226 out of that working family's pocket. And that's just an average amount. There are people who are paying more. There are people who are paying less. They will receive even less through the tax-free childcare scheme because it is so closely correlated with the actual amount being paid for the hours worked by the parent, not necessarily the amount that those parents are paying, perhaps to secure a full-time place, even though they're only working part-time hours, because that's all they can get.
So you're laying down a direct challenge that this is a better policy than what's in place at the moment?
In some circumstances it is. In other circumstances, don't get us wrong, tax-free childcare is better for some families. What we're saying is we need both options. Rather than restricting choice in this way, we need to make sure we've considered this carefully and try to protect both options if that's at all possible.
Okay. And how public and well communicated was the UK consultation in relation to the issue here in Northern Ireland?
Again, I'm not 100% sure how well publicised it was. We knew about it because obviously it's an issue we care about, so we made a point of keeping ourselves aware of it. The proposals have changed and continue to change. There's a further consultation that has just closed last week on another element of this scheme, so it's very difficult to get to grips with exactly how it's going to roll out. there is a lot of confusion, and I doubt many parents in Northern Ireland are even aware that this is happening.
I would agree with you. I think that's one of the biggest concerns that I have. I remember when the announcements were being made, parents asking, how is this going to affect us here in Northern Ireland? I remember asking OFM, DFM, how it's going to impact here in Northern Ireland, and I don't think we've had a huge amount of response. Hopefully we'll get some better updates here today from officials, but certainly a major concern that a significant policy change is being proposed and is in train, and that quite a significant amount of people are probably unaware that that's the case. Can I bring in Alex Maskey?
Thank you,
question?
Thank you, Mairead and Rachel, for your presentation. Just a couple of points there. On the one hand, I think you were saying early on there that this policy would conflict with the Department's Bright Start programme. I just wonder, could you elaborate a wee bit on that? And then, because you're saying you welcome some aspects of the policy but not all, in the end of the day, if the policy was introduced, would there be more people benefit from the new scheme than less? So some people might have to make a judgment, well, that's better than that, because more people have no benefit. So I wonder, would you have a sense that you may not, but just ask your opinion on that?
Yeah, certainly. In terms of Bright Start, I don't want to speak for the officials who are sitting behind me and know more about it than me, but part of the Bright Start strategy is to provide breakfast and after-school club provision for children up to the age of 14. Tax-free childcare will only be available for children up to the age of 12. So there's a clear mismatch there in terms of what the department's trying to provide and what parents will actually be able to afford if they can't get any assistance once the child reaches 12 years of age. In terms of the we like some but some we don't like others, I totally understand that that's what this might sound like. The part of the legislation that we really don't like are clauses 62 and 63 of the Westminster Bill, and they're the parts that repeal the employer supported childcare scheme. If there was some way in which we could not extend that here, so we could introduce the tax-free childcare scheme and leave the employer childcare support scheme as it stands, and figure out a way of making sure that nobody can benefit twice and that everybody has the opportunity to consider in their own circumstances who would be better off, that, to be honest, would be our ideal position. Perhaps Chris would like to explain a wee bit about the work he does in advising parents at the moment.
We would talk to approximately 4,500 parents per year, and of the ones who we would do a benefits calculation for, we look at, are they better off on childcare vouchers or better off on tax credits as it is at the moment, and approximately 56% of people are better off on the childcare voucher scheme than are better off on the childcare element of working tax credits. So there's going to be a comparison have to be done for all parents as to which one is better off, as there is a comparison being done at the moment, because there will always be two forms of childcare that they'll be able to choose from. Which one is better, which one they're better off on, will depend on their circumstances, on their income, and what their childcare costs are.
But you're saying, just in straightforward, if the policy comes in, there'll be less people benefit than currently on the voucher scheme. Is that what you're saying? Numerically, I mean, I know it may be hard to make a judgment on that.
It is hard to make a judgment on because it's based on everybody's personal circumstances. At the moment, there's about 11,000 people who are using the childcare voucher scheme. So they're the ones who definitely are better off on childcare vouchers, but whether they'd be better off on tax-free childcare compared to childcare vouchers, we don't know. We don't have those figures.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jimmy Spratt.
Thanks for the presentation. In terms of, I mean, I get the impression you want the best of both worlds. Have you costed it out?
Well, of course we want the best of both worlds for parents, because these are working parents, and we're trying to keep them in work. In terms of costing it out, no, we haven't. We don't have all of that data at our fingertips. We couldn't really cost out what the two schemes would run in parallel. What we can tell you is that the Northern Ireland economy is currently receiving £13 million in savings through the childcare voucher scheme. That is money that is coming from Westminster into the Northern Ireland economy directly as a result of the childcare voucher scheme. If that scheme was to close, we would lose those savings. So we would need to know that any deviation is going to cost more than that figure of 13 million. Otherwise, it's going to be a net loss.
Well, have you asked that question to anybody or any of the departments?
We would like to know whether the department has those figures. Certainly, we can
Have you asked?
ask them. We haven't at this stage, no.
As a matter of interest, Employers for Childcare Charitable Group, who funds you?
We're 100% self-financing charitable group.
Right.
There are 3 elements to the group.
So you raise your money through charitable events?
Through our social enterprises. We run 2 social enterprises and they fund the charity
Where are they based?
in Lisburn.
Right. Just interested because I haven't heard of your organisation before, and I was just interested, given what you've said to us. But you don't rule out the change, but you would like to know that it was, and I think the committee would probably, Chair, want to know that as well, in terms of how many people it's going to affect.
I agree, Jimmy. I think what you were alluding to there is that this will affect businesses as well in terms of savings that they currently make via national insurance contributions. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, employers save the 13.8% employers' national insurance contributions on any amount that's sacrificed by their employees through the childcare voucher scheme. So that is adding up to something in the region of £4 million a year in Northern Ireland. Those costs will go directly back into those businesses. They will have to pay that difference. Those savings are being enough.
Have you received much representation from businesses? Are they aware of this at this moment in time?
Again, I would be very surprised if they are aware of it, or if they are aware that they understand that this is what's going to happen.
Okay.
Well, what you're asking for is funded by Westminster. And what you might like might have to have additional funding. I mean, there's no control here over national insurance contributions, taxation, HMRC. We don't have the luxury of that control. So if there was additional costs, say number of millions of pounds, where would you suggest that should come from? Given that there's a budget now that all departments are struggling with.
Of course they are. I mean, the model that we're obviously most familiar with is the childcare voucher model. The way in which childcare vouchers work is that they are subsidised by the savings made by employers. So employers are contributing to these schemes to enable parents to stay and work. That is where that funding comes from. So that's why it's not costing us anything at the moment.
So are you suggesting to me that there should be some sort of a levy on employers?
That is how the current scheme works, and it works for everybody, because whilst they pay lower national insurance contributions, they pay an element of that towards the childcare voucher company, who can then provide the childcare vouchers for the parents, and yet they still save. So it's a net benefit for everybody. It's a win-win situation for everyone. It works. It's a model that works for 11,000 parents and over 1,000 organisations in Northern Ireland. So we would be keen to see that continue.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. I suppose it puts into stark contrast the fact that the Office of First and Deputy First Minister has unspent approximately £9 million of a £12 million childcare budget from 2011 to 2015 to date, and how that has been used or could be used in relation to some of these issues. What is and we will find this out and develop this, but what is the scope of making any adjustments at Westminster level at this stage, as opposed to having to go down the road that Mr Spratt rightly outlined in terms of local devolved funding for an alternative approach?
Honestly, we don't know what the scope is. We are working very hard with various MPs to try and make them aware of this change, because we're not even sure that they all understand how this is going to impact on parents.
Have you met with Northern Ireland MPs?
We've met with some, yeah, and we're hoping to hear back from others soon.
Right, okay. Okay, well, it's obviously a fairly urgent issue. We appreciate the detailed written briefing that you've given us today and the oral evidence that you've provided. I'm glad to stay in touch with you. Over the summer, the committee has a we'll have a decision to make in early September at our first meeting. It would be good to hear in a bit more detail maybe how those meetings with the MPs and the like go as well, in order to see if we make sure we get the best result for people in Northern Ireland here. And if you have any other information or findings over the summer, feel free to forward those to the committee. But thank you very much indeed for presenting to us today.
No problem. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, members, before we move on to hear from the departmental officials on this issue, can I also refer you to the Assembly research paper on the issue at page 173 of your packs. Okay, we will now be briefed by departmental officials on the legislative consent motion, and a copy of the legislative consent motion is also at page 225. Can I welcome to the committee Dr. Martin Turkle and Mr. David McGowan, please? Thank you. Okay, gentlemen, would you like to make some opening remarks?
Thank you, Deputy Chairman, for the opportunity to brief the committee on the proposals to extend provisions of the Westminster Childcare Payments Bill to Northern Ireland by means of a legislative consent motion. Accompanied today by Martin Turrell, who many of you may already know. Martin has lead responsibility for delivering on the Bright Start Childcare Strategy, and he will be able to answer any questions on the development of that strategy. I'm conscious that the committee has just received a briefing from Employers for Childcare about the proposed introduction of the new tax-free childcare scheme. I'm also conscious that Employers for Childcare have raised some specific concerns about the new scheme. In view of this, I intend to confine my opening remarks to providing the committee with an overview of why the Department is seeking to extend the provisions of the bill to this jurisdiction. I'm happy to take any specific questions on the detail of the new scheme. However, any questions that I'm not in a position to answer, I'm quite happy to take them back to the Department to ensure that the committee receives an accurate and substantive response. As members may be aware, the Childcare Payments Bill was introduced in the House of Commons on the 5th of June. When enacted, or if enacted, the bill will provide the statutory basis for the introduction of a new UK-wide tax-free childcare scheme to provide financial support to help working families with their childcare costs. The purpose of the scheme is to enable those with responsibilities for children to take up paid work or to work for longer where they are currently deterred from doing so because of the need to meet childcare costs. If members have had an opportunity to look at the bill, they may see that it contains a total of 74 clauses, quite a substantial piece of legislation. They may also see that it contains numerous regulation-making powers. These regulation-making powers will be used to specify in much greater detail the more technical aspects of this scheme. Why are we seeking to extend the provisions of the bill to here? Childcare is a transferred matter and obviously within the competence of the Assembly. However, in general, matters dealt with HMRC apply on a UK-wide basis. As the tax-free childcare scheme will be financed centrally by the coalition government, it is considered appropriate that the scheme should operate on a UK-wide basis and its operation made an accepted matter. This, however, will require a legislative consent motion from the Assembly. Securing such a motion will enable parents who live here to claim support from government with their childcare costs in the same way as those living in England, Scotland or Wales. The new scheme will replace the existing employer-supported childcare scheme, which currently provides financial support to parents. This scheme will be phased out. This will be achieved by preventing employers from joining a scheme after the new tax-free scheme comes into operation. However, those employees who are in such a scheme at that date can continue to do so for as long as they remain eligible and provided their employer continues to operate the scheme. Subject to enactment of the Westminster Bill, the new tax-free childcare scheme will become available from autumn 2015. I propose to stop now, but before doing so, I'd just like to draw attention to the legislative consent memorandum which has been laid before the Assembly and in relation to this bill. The memorandum has been formally referred to the committee to consider and to make a report to the Assembly. This scrutiny is effectively a precursor to ministers tabling a legislative consent motion for debate in plenary session in the Assembly. So I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Can I start by asking The original Westminster consultation was in August 2013, is that correct? Can I ask why this is the first time the department is coming to our committee to speak about this issue then?
In relation to that, it's unfortunate that the committee hasn't been involved prior to now, but basically we needed to take a position from ministers to allow us to speak to the committee. In relation to, I think there was a for the previous presentation, there was reference to consultation in relation to that particular scheme. Yes, that consultation was launched by Treasury in August. We wrote out to local stakeholders to advise them of the consultation and to make representation directly to those who were running the consultation. Now, in terms of that, it may have been useful to have included the Assembly or the committee in that consultation. But in terms of local stakeholders...
Sounds like one of the biggest understatements I've ever heard.
Yeah, write that one down.
Okay, and so how did the department respond to the consultation?
The department sought comments from departments and pulled those comments together and submitted them to the HMRC who were running the consultation.
So OFM, DFM did submit a consultation response in August 2013, yeah?
That would have been sort of from government. It didn't include...
what does that mean?
From departments. We took comments from departments.
Can we have a copy of the consultation response?
You can.
Okay, and you say that you consulted, or you wrote to local stakeholders. What exactly did that look like? What local stakeholders did that include?
All those who responded to the consultation on the childcare strategy.
Can we have a list of those stakeholders?
You can.
Okay, and I mean, was there any other wider public consultation in terms of outreaching to parents or businesses?
Not by the department.
Okay. I think there's serious issues around the level of proactivity from the department in relation to that particular consultation, but we can maybe draw that out further. What type of impact assessments, economic impact assessments, equality impact assessments have been made in relation to these proposals in Northern Ireland?
Well, in terms of we haven't drawn up a specific economic impact assessment. There is an impact assessment that goes along with the bill which has been laid. In terms of Section 75, we've carried out a screening exercise in relation to the various Section 75 categories.
So what's the impact on businesses in Northern Ireland going to be?
The impact on businesses is that, yes, they will lose the benefits that they would have received from the discount on their national insurance contributions.
And are they aware of? Have they been consulted on that? Are they aware of that? What have you done to engage with businesses around that issue that you're going to support introduction of?
We haven't engaged with with employers on that. There is essentially the policy on this here is a Treasury HMRC policy. Therefore, we haven't engaged directly with.
Is this policy going to be better than the current policy for families in Northern Ireland?
The policy will be fairer in terms of having a wider spread of potential applicants to the scheme. It will include those employees who work for an employer who doesn't currently or isn't part of an employer-supported childcare scheme. It also cover the self-employed. So effectively, there's a wider pool of families who could potentially benefit from this. Within that, obviously, then there's variations on what individual families would receive, between 1 the new scheme and the old scheme.
So this is better than the current scheme, you're saying then? You're asking us to support a motion?
It will be fairer, and it will have broader impact in terms of support, in terms of the criteria that will be used to provide support. This will be more related to children. In other words, the amount of money that government will provide will be linked to the number of children that is within a particular family.
Okay, bring in committee members to ask questions as well. Alex Maskey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I'm trying to get a sense, I mean, apart from the last couple of comments which are saying, this is a question I asked earlier on, would be more benefit than currently under a new scheme, because I don't think you were actually giving us much to commend to LCM for there a few minutes ago, with all due respect. So, I mean, obviously, I would be keen to know that more people will benefit from this scheme than those who are benefiting from the current scheme. You seem to be suggesting that would be the case. But I'm not sure if anybody's entirely convinced about that, because I don't know. One of the things that, the reason why I'm asking that and focusing on it, because clearly that's just a sums, a head count, more people benefit than that. But we've had problems dealing with this in terms of, because I mean, there is an outstanding budget. You referenced this yourself a few minutes ago. There is an outstanding budget that hasn't been spent yet. There seems to be a difficulty getting people to take up the opportunities that there are. So how can we be convinced that there be more people take up this opportunity? Because that, you know, that's, I'm trying to get my head around it. People think there's an opportunity, why not go and take it?
At present, the employer-supported assistance is routed through employers, so parents who wish to avail of support, they're dependent on their employers being in the system. Now, Northern Ireland has relatively low uptake. I think it has the lowest uptake in the UK.
Why do you think that is?
I think that not all employers are participating in the scheme.
Has anybody told people about the scheme?
Well, there's certainly been publicity for the scheme through, for example, Employers for Childcare. Well, our Bright Start childcare strategy includes the Family Support NI website, which is going to include promotion of all of the support currently available with the cost of childcare. This new scheme, because it doesn't depend on the participation of employers, should, by that fact, benefit more people. More people will be able to avail of it. Also, because, as David has said, the funding follows the child. The funding isn't following the parents, as in the current scheme. The funding is following the children. So a family with 5 children will get 5 lots of support potentially, whereas under the current scheme the support solely goes to the adults in the family through their employers.
Can I ask there, and a response from the previous delegation there, when give a reference around the Bright Start, for example, that this might conflict with some of the components of Bright Start. So, for example, breakfast clubs wouldn't be facilitated on the new scheme. I don't know whether that's right or not, but that's what we're being told. So, just 2 points in. I mean, is there a likelihood that this would conflict with the intentions of the Bright Start in a practical sense? And then can you give us any the essence of the responses from the consultees?
Well, on the first point, whether this conflicts with Bright Start, generally not. We will promote this scheme if it is introduced through the normal mechanisms, and we will encourage all participating childcare settings in the Bright Starts programme to promote this scheme, and we will encourage parents to take up the assistance available. That will be part and package of the Bright Start strategy. The issue that Employers for Childcare have raised, and it's relevant, is that we're focusing our school-age childcare on 4 to 14-year-olds, whereas this assistance cuts off at the age of 12. So there will be children aged 13 and 14 who will not attract the funding under this scheme, and that's certainly something that we'll look into. Although, that said, predominantly school-age childcare is a phenomenon of primary school-age children. The 13-14-year age group is relatively marginal within that group. Secondary schools, it tends not to be something that secondary school pupils go for. It's more primary school pupils that are involved in school-age childcare. But certainly we would be looking at the implications of this scheme for the Bright Start strategy.
But it's just, sure, just the two points for that. I mean, I was looking if there was any sort of sense of the response from the various stakeholders, just to see what the broader response might have been. But when you're saying there, you might look into that, the thing difference between the 12 and the 14-year-olds.
Yeah.
Seem to be suggesting that that's marginal, maybe numbers, but you're saying looking into it. But if an LCM comes in, you can look into all you want, you won't change it.
I think as the new system is introduced, there will be developments within it, like any system, and certainly if we are asked again, we could ask for that to be considered, assistance for 13 and 14-year-olds. But we would need to look and see what level of uptake of childcare services there is by 13 and 14-year-olds before we would go and see if there's merit in pursuing extending this new proposed system to that age group.
So the responses on the consultation, I mean, you're saying you've contacted stakeholders, so you've got anything back from them which would have sparked a discussion around some of that?
Now, I don't recall, I don't have to hand what the stakeholders told us at the time we went out on the new proposals. We're currently engaging with stakeholders on the full version of the Bright Start strategy. What we've launched to date is an initial phase, key first actions. We're currently developing the full final version of the Bright Start strategy, and we are engaging with stakeholder groups right now on that matter, including employers for childcare, and this is certainly something that we can take note of in the course of that consultation exercise.
Thank you.
Okay, Leslie Cray.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just clarification on a couple of points, gentlemen. Has the department decided to support this legislative consent motion?
Well, ministers have endorsed it, and we've sought and obtained executive agreement.
So both have agreed, so there's no question of a private bill coming up?
No.
To avoid that particular path?
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned that the existing scheme, the voucher scheme, as I call it, can continue as it is. And then another bit put some doubt in my mind when you mentioned the national insurance contributions, that employers would not be getting that benefit anymore. Could you just clarify, if the existing voucher scheme continues, does it continue in exactly the same form as it does at present?
It does, yes.
So therefore the employers would not lose that national insurance benefit?
For as long as their employees opt to remain within the current scheme and they remain eligible for payments within that scheme, they can remain within that employer support side, and the employers will receive the tax and national insurance reliefs associated with that.
So therefore, this new scheme will only apply to new entrants?
Yes and no. The reason why I say that is people who are in employer-supported childcare, in other words, tax vouchers situation at the moment, can opt to move to the new scheme if that is more financially beneficial to them.
Hardly likely, is it?
Well, I know that sort of people will put around various permutations, but anybody who's got 2 children will be better off normally moving to the new scheme. So yes, on certain situations there will be variations in the amount that people receive, but effectively there will be no losers, because no direct losers. So therefore anybody who's currently in a scheme eligible, receiving that support from employers supported childcare, they want to remain within that, will continue within that there if they do not want to change to the new system.
I think that's an important point to make.
It is, in so much as that the word grandfathering was used by employers for childcare in relation to the existing scheme, and that is in fact the case, that it will be phased out over time. Clearly, in the initial stages, people may remain within that there.
Sorry, now you worry me again.
Sorry.
Phased out over time?
Well, at a point in time, people will not be eligible to join the tax voucher scheme.
You should just explain the detail of that.
Well, when the new legislation comes into operation, people who haven't previously claimed vouchers cannot decide they want to go back and claim.
No, they're new people in my book. Okay.
They will come into the new scheme. People who are in the existing scheme can stay as long as they feel that that's beneficial. So it effectively will, over time, run down because new people will not be able to
Yeah, they'll die off.
join.
Okay, right. But there's no change, subtle change.
No, there's no
sudden.
sudden change. Things will stay as they are. Over time, the current scheme will naturally disappear over time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Jimmy Spratt.
Thanks, Chair. Just to clarify, in terms of, you said the executive had approved. It's not just the department. The ministers from the department have taken it to the executive.
Yes.
Executive ministers have agreed.
That's correct.
Right. In terms of the people who will actually benefit from it, up until this point, self-employed people have not benefited. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. They have not.
So it could be naturally assumed that many more people will actually benefit. So it'll be more benefit in terms of people who might be in the voucher scheme at the minute with more than one child will benefit, and they would hardly want to stay within the voucher scheme. Isn't that correct?
If the circumstances that one is more beneficial, clearly they will move to the new scheme.
And in terms of the uptake, in terms of Northern Ireland, and you said that wasn't great. We were what did you suggest, that we were one of the regions that were lagging behind in that?
We're, I think, bottom of
the league,
number 4 of them.
Right. Well, one would think then, in terms of people, for instance, self-employed people who will have to do tax returns on a yearly basis, that will be one of the things that will be pointed out to them in terms of their tax returns. Is that right?
Well, certainly
that you're going to benefit.
Well, there will be communication with, and I would imagine there will be a publicity campaign associated with this here to advise those who are not or can't avail of the current system, that there's a new system which they can apply to.
You heard earlier the presentation earlier. This whole thing's financed from Westminster. All of the money comes back into Northern Ireland from Westminster. The folks who were at the table before you suggested that they would like best of both worlds, but they had no costings for that. Has the department any costings for both worlds, or what?
There isn't a costing for both worlds. In terms of numbers, it's always very imprecise as to figures. We did look at census figures, and the latest census figures from 2011 to try to identify the number of families who would likely fall into the catchment of the new scheme. We come up with figures from that census, using parents who were both working and had children, within the age ranges, to come up with a figure of just around about 100,000 people. Now, that's not to say that 100,000 people will apply, but using figures, there's a potential uptake of 100,000 families. As I'm contrasting that to the figure that was quoted, I think, in terms of the number of families receiving the vouchers.
But the best of both worlds would be at a cost, I assume, to the Northern Ireland Executive?
I think the plain fact of the matter is that the employer-supported childcare scheme is supported through tax and national insurance reliefs. In effect, that's an accepted matter. Whether the bill extends to Northern Ireland or it doesn't, the employer-supported childcare scheme, if it remains within the Westminster Bill and doesn't extend to Northern Ireland, the fact that the legislation that it's amending will extend to here will mean that that scheme will go. So, in effect, Northern Ireland will not have people able to join an employer-supported childcare scheme from autumn 15, and unless it's got some other scheme, local scheme, they will have no support from government.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, Jimmy. Just to build on that, OFM DFM has never made any contribution of any nature towards the childcare voucher scheme, so it would be a challenge, I suspect, to have it to do so from now.
Absolutely.
No. There's no financial support to that scheme. It all comes through tax and national insurance reliefs.
Okay, Bronwyn McGahan.
Okay, thank you. I know for myself as a local MLA, I would have been advertising the fact in my own local papers, you know, the childcare voucher scheme, and I don't know what that done, you know, to encourage local people to apply for that, but I do know there was a very poor uptake. I know that not all employers could avail of it. I know people who are paying up an £800 childcare for 2 kids who couldn't avail of it. So childcare just doesn't affect low-income families, but it also, you know, affects people who are taking in a good income. But most of it goes in childcare costs. But can I ask, you know, could this new scheme potentially push up the cost of childcare? What's the pros and cons to that?
It shouldn't, you know. As happens at the moment, you know, payments, you know, are made to the provider from the tax voucher account, and likewise under the new system, payments will be made to the provider for the cost of childcare. You know, it shouldn't have any impact on the cost of childcare, because there will be little administration for the provider, other and above what they're already doing at the moment. So a lot of those childcare providers would have accounts to receive tax free, or the current voucher system. So, you know, there shouldn't be any.
And just to clarify, all families can apply for this, whereas before it was limited to certain employers. The way it works. There
is a, you know, I have to admit, there's a range of eligibility criteria which is set out, you know, but essentially it has to be working families where both parents are working.
Both parents.
Both.
And what about single parents?
Single parents, that you know, there would be no distinction made. You know, a single parent working, you know, will receive the same support as two working parents. So yes, a single parent can apply.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, does that mean
Go ahead, Alex.
if 2 parents, one's not working, they can't apply?
Correct.
They're not eligible?
That's correct.
Is that not adverse?
The target of the new scheme is to support working families, and the way it is structured is that it is both parents working.
Okay. Stephen Moodry.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask you, just the presenters previous to yourselves in their written submission raised concerns around the application process. What can you tell us about the application process? To allay the concerns that they have. I mean, they talk about possibility of a complex process, one that's going to have to be reviewed every 3 months.
The system of applying, the intention is that it will be simple and easy as the current system. There is still decisions to be taken as to who actually is going to administer the childcare accounts, online accounts. I think a final decision has not been taken on that there, and you know, the previous employer childcare did allude to a consultation there recently in relation to who would actually run the accounts. But to all intents and purposes, it should be a simple, easy system for parents to access. It will be online with help for those who can't access an online account, but it'll be similar where there will be an online account to which parents can put money into that account, and that money then be topped up by a payment from government, and that money will be in that account and will go to their registered childcare provider. Now, there's a situation where, yes, there will be entitlement periods. So there will be 3-month entitlement periods where at the beginning of that period you'll have to show that you're actually eligible and entitled to it. And whether your circumstances change or not within those 3 months, you will remain entitled for those 3 months. At the end of the 3 months, then effectively, yes, you will be having to show eligibility again at the end of that entitlement period. But if there's no change, to your circumstances, no issue with continue to receive support.
Okay, thank you. And there's just one more point you made in answer to Jimmy Spratt that I didn't just pick up. This is already, the scheme in principle has been agreed by the executive, is that it?
The executive has agreed that it wishes to seek to promote and bring forward a legislative consent motion. So therefore, clearly the legislative consent motion is a motion which will be debated on the floor of the Assembly. But the executive has agreed to support that motion.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, George Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a small question. Has there been an awareness sort of a campaign to let parents and let people know that it does exist?
Very good. Okay.
When the scheme is introduced as part of the promotional work undertaken under the Bright Start Childcare Strategy, we will be promoting the new financial assistance, and we will be encouraging all of the settings that we support, all of the childcare settings, to promote the assistance to their service users. That will be a condition of their receiving funding under the Bright Start Strategy.
But as it stands at the moment, there is no campaign out there to let people know.
Only what HMRC are doing?
Yeah, well, I say to a degree, this is still subject to legislation. The bill will provide the statutory basis for that there. So therefore, yes, there will be a campaign at a point in time to promote this here. But as I say, the legislation is still before, or has just been introduced at Westminster. So the awareness that there is out there will be through the consultation process that have already been held, so that there is an awareness that there is something happening down the line. But the actual promotion of the scheme clearly will
be premature yet.
Well, there's awareness, but I say to actually physically promote at this stage, and certainly that is something which HMRC will be doing in due course.
Thanks.
Okay, gentlemen, just in closing, can you tell me exactly how many local stakeholders that you wrote to in relation to the consultation?
Those that we wrote to were those who responded to there was a childcare consultation strategy consultation.
Okay. But you just top of your head, you don't know how many that is at this stage?
If it's the number that, if it's equivalent to the number that sent in written responses to the consultation document, it would be between 60 and 70, because there were between 60 and 70 detailed written responses to the consultation document. So each of those stakeholders were approached.
How many responses did you receive back?
We asked that they respond direct to HMRC and copy the response to ourselves. I need to check.
How many copied responses did you receive?
I don't have that.
Okay. How quickly can you provide us with an accurate list of the organisations that you wrote to and the responses that you received? We're going into recess. Is that something you can do in a matter of days, for example? Yeah.
I'm sure I have.
Okay, you can do that to the clerk in the next few days, yeah?
Yeah, that's not a problem.
Okay, no problem. To be honest, gentlemen, I think you've seen it, whether executive have approved or released the LCM to come for Assembly consideration, or whether this is a better scheme or not. There's been quite a few questions raised by the committee here today, hopefully constructive questions, but on foot of that I find it astonishing that this committee was not advised or communicated with from the department whenever the consultation was live, not least given how many different sessions we've had on the issue of childcare across the time since then, and for an organisation like Employers for Childcare, who I am aware have assisted huge number of families with childcare across Northern Ireland, frankly, in the absence of assistance from OFM DFM, to not feel communicated with on this issue is poor as well. It's an increasingly complicated framework for families and parents to know how to engage with and avail of childcare opportunities, and it doesn't feel like we're anywhere closer to making that, the OFM DFM's anywhere closer to making that less complicated. Hopefully those are constructive criticisms and feedback that we've put to you today, and you can have a think about how you can utilise the committee more to try and assist with addressing those concerns. And we'll take on board the information that if you provide to us as soon as possible. We obviously have a decision to make as a committee, but given the late stage that we've received briefing and communication in relation to this issue, we're now in effect the next committee meeting that we meet required to take a decision in relation to this issue. So we may have to think creatively about how we feed our own views into that. But thank you for your presentation and for taking our questions.
Could I maybe ask two quickie points when we have the gentleman here that are germane? I don't see any reference to legislative consent motion for either Scotland or Wales. Do you know if that's because this childcare function hasn't been delegated?
Well, the legislation extends to England and Wales.
Yes,
Scotland,
it's GB legislation.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It extends there, so they're not required to.
Right, so it's not involved there then.
That's not.
And the other point is that in the bill I see reference to universal credit.
Yeah.
Which presupposes that that's going to be applying here. How do you propose to handle that one?
I think if you look at it, there's probably a crafty construction in terms of the wording in that there, which does refer to.
It doesn't exclude Northern Ireland, but.
Well, I say I need to look closer at the wording in that there, but I say there is, the way it's drafted, is flexible in relation to whatever welfare system exists here at that time.
I think it's more specific on universal credit. Perhaps you could come back on that one.
I can.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's why we'll need creative ambiguity.
Okay.
Like that.
Gentlemen, thanks very much indeed for your presentation. Thank you. Okay, members. As I say, do we have any comments in relation to that? In terms of the written briefing that employers for childcare have highlighted a number of questions and concerns. Are members content for the committee to forward that paper to the department to get more detailed feedback in order to feed that into our decision-making process? Members also content to consider a short report on the LCM at our meeting on the 10th of December, and perhaps September, did I say December? Sorry, it's getting late.
Alright, we're happy enough with it.
10th of September, and perhaps party groups can feed in their own particular views or positions in relation to this issue via the clerk to ensure that we're properly prepared for that decision that we have to take in September. Members content to forward a link of today's official report along with the briefing papers from employers for childcare and the department to the Committee for Employment and Learning for information.
I presume you'll deal with maybe later on the just receipt of information over the next number of weeks, because obviously some committees maybe do it differently, but you'll get at least 2 batches of correspondence, I presume, just so as we get this.
Do you want to come in on that, Clerk?
Just at the start of the meeting, we talked about housekeeping, and I think the previous precedent of this committee is to receive it all just at the first meeting back, and anything urgent then is circulated by email, and that was agreed earlier. But if you have a different
well, I'm just wondering there, because there's a fair bit there. I mean, the officials are indicating they could do some of that responses in days.
Certainly, we can forward any information relating to this to members, or I mean, we could do 2 batches of correspondence in July and August. But in this relation to this, we could send that out. That would be no problem.
Yeah, I
think I think it's a fair point, Alex. If the clerk and officials use their discretion where something is clearly going to be urgent consideration, they can email that out to members then. All right.
I mean, this is time critical, Chair, to give the floor.
Absolutely, yeah.
The Assembly.
Absolutely.
Again, Chair, I think they were very cavalier in their approach to the committee at the outset. That annoyed me, I must say.
Well, if you're some bucks, Leslie.
No, we have a statutory right, James. You may be aware of that.
I get Leslie, Jimmy, just to respond to both. I'm not necessarily sure that there was any ill intent as opposed to an over keenness to just defer the issue to Westminster. You know, it's a extremely important local issue that I think constructive input could have been made and hopefully still can be made, but it's concerning. I think I agree that our committee wasn't communicated with in a more direct way, but maybe we can get some information around the organisations that were communicated with and the types of responses they put forward to help us inform us in our decision making process. Okay, members.
I do think it is. I do think it is important that this committee is the first and foremost council key. It's not an option. It's not an add-on. So I think we should make that point.
Yeah, I think to say local stakeholders were consulted and we weren't one of those. It is an issue. I don't think anybody would disagree, and we can convey that to the department again.
I chaired
Roman, yeah.
also as well, you know, regarding working parents and single parents. I didn't come away with any confidence in the response, but where you have both parents working and one of them's on zero contract hours, does that actually impact on them being able to apply for that scheme? And I failed to mention that, but it's just worth exploring as well, given the fact that this is, you know, zero contract hours is a big issue.
I think these are all legitimate questions that we're unfortunately now trying to ask at a very, very late stage of the process, and indeed the Employment and Learning Committee for Employment and Learning, which would have an interest in those issues as well, has had no information or briefing on any of these matters as far as
the key point. The department hasn't been left out because it's been with the executive.
Well, I suppose
you have two ministers on that executive.
Yeah, no, I take that point, Jimmy, and that's why I reference whether there's been executive approval or not. I suppose, given the extent to which OFM DFM provided us with information to make our decision around it, I'm not one to guess what information they provided the executive to make their decision around it either. But we are where we are at this stage, so I think we need to move fast to consider some of those legitimate concerns that are being raised in the recess period that we'll have to do so. I'm sure there are organisations will be willing to speak to us as well, but important that we do whatever we can to make a constructive contribution. It's going to affect a lot of people, hopefully ultimately positively, but there are concerns there. Okay, members, move to agenda item 9, the Executive's EU priorities for 2014-15 written briefing. We've received a written briefing from the department on the priorities yesterday at 11:56 a.m. and it's available at page 123 of the tabled pack. The department has advised that the document is a work in progress and that the thematic groups and departments will further refine their strategic EU priorities over the summer months. The department has indicated that it would welcome the view of the committee prior to the draft European priorities being submitted to the executive for approval. Do members have any comments on this? I suppose it has been addressed to a certain extent in the committee report on the inquiry into Barroso that the EU priorities for the year need to be set earlier in the year to give people an opportunity to feed into those. But are members content to invite officials to brief the committee early in the 14-15 session on the executive's priorities and associated action plan?
Yep.
Agreed.
Okay. Agenda item 10 then is the draft forward work programme. At our meeting on the 18th of June, we considered draft terms of reference for an inquiry into building a united community. The committee agreed that it would consider the draft terms of reference again before the end of this session, and the amended terms of reference are included at page 233 of your packs. Are members content to agree the terms of reference? Clark, do you want to make any comments in relation to the minor amendments that have been made to try and address comments that were made previously?
Certainly, page 235 shows the draft terms of reference as they've been amended. Certainly focuses on communities in general, really doesn't specify any particular group. So, for example, the second main bullet point there, seek views on what good relations means and how sectarianism and division can be addressed, is throws it open to any group or organisation or community that wishes to respond. The only other minor amendment is just in relation to references to peace walls have been removed and changed to references to interface barriers to reflect the rural and urban nature of the issue, and if members are content with that.
So the amendments were really to try and make it as inclusive as possible in terms of people to engage with in relation to the issue. Do members have any comments or content to agree the draft terms?
Just in terms of the process then, how do we, without naming or specifying any organisation or groups or sector, but in terms of the process, how will the process be an open invitation? Will we advertise?
If you want to go to page 236 of your packs, then we have a draft list of stakeholders. So that includes all the statutory committees, all departments, local councils, groups that have been specifically in contact with the Committee on Good Relations issues, appropriate arm's length bodies and statutory bodies, academics, institutions, and you'll be aware of the Assembly Community Connect group, which has a database of almost 1,500 groups and individuals in the voluntary community sector that have engaged with the Assembly. So we'll issue out to that as well. And members, if you just go to your table papers and look at page 137, is an advert that will go into the 3 daily regional papers, just highlighting that there is a consultation and signposting people to the appropriate part of the committee website, which will then be updated with the terms of reference and details of how to respond. So the normal procedure is that would go into the Belfast Telegraph, the newsletter and the Irish News, just a small advert. If members are content with that, we'll put that in, unless there's other points or places that members would like to have that advert included.
My understanding was committee-wise you can't deviate from the protocol for all committees.
Yeah, that's fine. We can keep that.
I mean, that's the normal procedure for any.
Clark, and building on Alex's question, can members propose people to be notified of the consultation process as well?
If the terms of reference are agreed today, what will happen procedurally wise is that staff will send out notifications next week. This advert will be in papers next Wednesday or Thursday, and staff will email out to those groups of people. Now, if there are particular groups and organisations that members would like included, then if you forward that information on to us, then we will ensure that they are included in the list.
I think all that's useful. People can identify groups if they want, but it shouldn't be up to us to have to identify groups. This process needs to be open so that people can invite themselves to it, coming to us. So what concerns me a wee bit there is that, the terms of reference are fine because they're open-ended, and that's good. The list of stakeholders are really people who have came to Assembly or others, and I don't know within the 1,500 groups who's all on that list, so without me looking at the list I don't know who's on or who's off it. We don't want to be wasting time here on the elephants in the room, but are there organisations like ex-prisoners organisations or whatever else who want to engage with us? Will they be able to respond and put their names forward?
Oh yes, and
I don't know whether they will or not. But
the information will be publicly available on the committee's website as well.
So people can come up and say, I want to go to that, and we say fine.
Yeah, well, initially what this is asking for is written submissions, and then from the written submissions that are received, the members will then consider how they want to use that information in terms of progressing that forward.
Thank you.
Okay. So, members content, the committee makes the call for evidence on the terms of reference, and members content to agree the draft notice for publication in line with established protocol, as well as placing further information on the committee's website.
Agreed.
Okay. Also on page 237 for your information is a copy of the research paper by Assembly Research and Information Services on peace building initiatives, examples outside of Northern Ireland. Members content for committee staff to explore options for a European study visit with regard to the inquiry. Sorry, no. Todd, you want to come in, Jimmy?
Oh, no, I think it's...
Is that Jimmy? Or did you say agreed? Oh, sorry, apologies, misheard you there. Okay, agreed.
We project down our Naples line, won't we?
Okay, any other business? Can I maybe just raise one issue briefly? The Central Good Relations Fund from the department runs from financial year 2014-15, Organisations have raised concern with me that there's been a delay for some organisations in terms of hearing back about applications to the fund. Would the committee be content for us to write to the department just to seek an update in relation to progress on the allocation of the Central Good Relations Fund? Is that okay? Agreed. Okay. Okay then, if there's no other business... Oh, sorry. Yes, go ahead.
It's just really a query if we can write to the department and ask. As far as I'm aware, the Good Relations Strategy only really covers sectarianism and racism. Homophobia wouldn't be covered under it. So can we write and ask what the chances are of being that included, or are we dealt with? Or
I imagine the response will be that the sexual orientation strategy, which is referenced in Towards Building a United Community, will be regarded as a departmental approach on that issue. We're scheduled to get a briefing in relation to that in early September. Maybe that would be an opportunity for you to decide whether you think there's enough being done.
I'll raise it then, but
okay?
It's an issue that has been raised with me by different groups, so I'm just raising it.
Yep, okay. The date, time and location of our next meeting is Wednesday the 3rd of September at 1 p.m. in Ranfurly House, Dungannon. So this is our last meeting, members, so have a productive summer. I know the media would have the public think that we're all going to far-flung destinations. I know you'll all be working hard in your constituency offices, so I wish you well for it. All the best.
Okay, thank you.